just saw you do it, and that was it. And you were able to test your routing, but also you were able to test your adaptation. Remember the one that you configured to dial *9, the extension number, and that was it. So pretty much the last thing you did yesterday was the adaptation and this called routing test too. I wanted to show you something that's not in the manual that can be useful related to adaptations. And the thing that I want to show you is it's a domain name adaptation. Okay, the one that you saw, just a digit conversion. Hey Anita, I was thinking, is she gonna make it?
Made it.
Hey, you made it. Domain name adaptation. Again, it's not in the book, but there is a good chance that you go back to your production environment and you get to see domain name adaptation, and it's gonna be better if you're able to understand what's going on. So what I want to do for this scenario, I want to create a scenario where I need to create a domain name change. So right now what you have is your session manager, and then your session manager is communicating with your CM, right? Through an entity link. Here you have your CM, and in your CM, both the network region and the signaling group between CM and session manager are configured to be in the domain, in the converge1.com domain. So right now, pretty much all of the stations in that CM, I mean, you only have one right now, but that H223 station, if it places a call to session manager, the invite is gonna go to whatever extension he's dialing at converge1.com, because pretty much this CM is configured to be in this domain, converge1.com. So again, both the signaling group and the IP network region of these phones are in that domain. So what I want to do, I want to have a SIP phone here, and instead of registering the phone to converge1.com in this session manager, what I want to do is, let me see, what extension number am I using right now? I think it was 1203. Yeah, 1203 at converge1.com. So what I actually want to do is log out, and I want to register as 1203 at maybe abc.com, another domain. Okay? And what I want to do is, once I register with that domain, I want to try to place a call to the H23 phone in CM, and that's going to fail, because the invite is going to go to that extension number, but the invite is going to go to abc.com, because that's the domain that the phone is registered to. Notice that you never dial, I mean, when you dial out, you never specify the domain you're dialing. You just dial a number, and then the phone creates the invite with the domain he's using, with the domain the phone is using. So if I dial this guy, it's gonna go to whatever this extension is. I think in lab 1 is 1401, right? At converge1.com. And when that invite goes to CM, CM is gonna say like, hey, I don't know anybody with 1401 at abc.com, and it's gonna reject the call. So I wanna once I have that scenario going, I wanna create an adaptation to convert this domain to be now converge1.com. Okay, that's what I wanna do. Make sense?
Yes.
Let's see, so 1203, let's see, settings. Well, first of all, I need to go to System Manager here, Lab 1. I need to go to the SIP entities. And I need to go to your Session Manager SIP entity, because right now that Session Manager SIP entity is only listening right on these ports and these protocols using this domain. So I need to add another entry. Now listening to, oh, so you have a salchicha.com that maybe I could use. But actually, let's see, let's have another domain. So just so that you remember that adding domains is very easy. I'm gonna create my abc.com here. And now I'm gonna go back to routing, SIP entities, your session manager. And now I'm gonna add a new entry, TLS, abc.com, and the port you're gonna see if I try to commit here 5061, it's gonna tell me, hey, port 5061 with protocol TLS is not unique. So I'll have to pick up another port, 5062, okay? TLS at abc.com. Another thing that I need to do before I try to register that phone is I need to go to user management, manage users, and change my request URI, right? Because I'm right now, my user profile is configured right now as 1203 at converge1.com, not abc.com. So I'm gonna change that to be now abc.com. Make sense? Yeah, changing my profile so that I can register. What else? I think that's it. Let's see. If I now change this to TLS port 5062, right? And then instead of converge1.com, I go with abc.com in my 1x communicator. Let's see if I'm able to register. And I couldn't. Huh. Let's try one more time because it could be a matter of time. Maybe that change that I did in system manager was not pushed to session manager yet. That's probably what happened. So I'm right now logged into 1203 at abc.com. Let me see another one. I want to make sure. Let me see the routing in lab 1. If I go to routing policies, let me check the one that goes to CM. This one, right? SM to CM. The reason why I want to check that one is because, yep, you see, you're only allowing to go to converge1.com to go to CM. You know, only those invites that are going to converge1.com are going to be routed to CM. And I want my invite to be routed to CM. It's just that CM is going to reject it, but I do want session manager to route it to CM, right? So I need to change this. Not here. Notice that I cannot change it here, but you actually change it in dial patterns. The dial pattern is this one, 14. And all I'm going to say is, instead of converge1.com, I'm going to change this to all. All doesn't mean all of the domains in the universe. All means all of the domains configured in this session manager. Okay? So what I'm saying is that if session manager receives something that starts with 14 and the domain is either converge1.com, salchicha.com, or abc.com, session manager is going to route that to CM. Okay? Perfect. Let's see, what's the trace? Is this the trace? Man, I lost the trace. I have to reopen that. Probably need to change the save a session with all these settings instead of being changing the settings every time. Right? Trace SM. gonna capture, and I'm gonna call 1401, right? And that should fail, but let's see what's the message that I get.
Forbidden.
So if I go to, if I see, session manager is sending the invite to CM, right? And it's CM the one that's rejecting it with a forbidden message, and it says invalid domain in the from header. And it makes sense, right? Because CM is right now configured, everything in that CM is configured to be in converge1.com. So if you take a look at the invite, I'm inviting to a session. The request URI is 1401 at abc.com, and CM is like, well, I don't know anybody with that, with that request URI. So it's rejecting it. It's giving me that forbidden message saying invalid. What's the message? Invalid domain in the from header. Okay. So I have my scenario ready to show you how to manipulate domains in Session Manager. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna create an adaptation in Session Manager. This is the one you guys created yesterday. I'm gonna create an adaptation and I'm gonna name it right now change domain, which in a few minutes I'm gonna show you is not the best name, but I'll name it for now change domain. And the adapter that I'm gonna be using is the digit conversion adapter, because that adapter is not only useful to convert digits, but also allows you to modify domain names. Okay? Domain names for all of the headers? No, only for some specific headers, but I know that the headers that I need to modify are some headers that I could modify with the digit conversion adapter. Okay, this time I don't need to do anything related to digit conversion, so I'm not gonna do anything here or here because this is not a digit conversion. Instead, it's a domain name conversion. Now, before I decide, or before I start changing stuff, as with any adaptation, I need to decide if I want to make this work as outgoing or incoming. That's the very first question that you need to ask yourself. And what do you think? Let's see. Kind of in the same scenario that I was yesterday. This is a SIP phone right now, right? Not a SIP entity. From this session my perspective, how many SIP entities I have? Only one.
This one.
CM.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be forced to make this work as an outgoing adaptation, right? For calls going from session manager to this CM. Okay. Make sense? So that's decided. It's going to be an outgoing, let's say, egress adaptation. Okay.
Why would it wouldn't be an incoming if it's also coming, like both, coming from the CM to the session manager?
Good question. Yeah. If I also want to modify messages coming from CM, then it would be an incoming adaptation. But at this point, I'm the one placing the call, right? So in this case, I'm going in this direction and have to make it work as an outgoing adaptation. But you're absolutely right. If I later realize that I need to modify something for calls going from CM to session manager because maybe those calls are not happening, because of the domain, I would have to then create an incoming adaptation associated to CM. Okay. So I'm gonna add, I know that I need to modify two headers. I need to modify, I'm gonna open up the invite that's going to CM. First thing I need to modify is the request URI. I need to change it to be 1401 at converge1.com. That's one thing. Request URI. The other thing that I need to modify is this P asserted identity header, because CM wants to see that as if it was coming from converge1.com as well. So the P asserted identity header, which always has information about the caller, in this case it's me, I need to modify that header to be 1203 at converge1.com. So I need to modify those two things. PAI, the P asserted identity header, and the request URI. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go to the help. I'm going to go to page fields, just to show you that here you have the options that you could use to modify those headers. First of all, we already decided that this is an egress adaptation, right? It's just outgoing. So if I want to modify the request URI, they're telling me here that this is the option, to go with override destination domain. Being careful with the capital letters that you see there. Or they're letting me know that if I don't want to type all that long string, I could use this abbreviation, ODSTD. So I'm gonna go with that option, stay here with me, and to override the destination domain, which could be abbreviated as ODSTD, I'm going to use that. I'm going to change that to converge1.com.
That's the URI?
That's going to modify, yeah, that one, over destination domain, is going to allow me to modify the request URI. Now, there's another one, this one, override source domain, can be abbreviated as OSRCD, as you can see here, and that one is going to allow me to modify the from header if I want to. Notice it says if administered, and the P asserted identity, which is the one that I want to modify. So that's the other option I want to use. I want to modify the P asserted identity with that abbreviation to be converge1.com as well. I'm going to commit. What am I missing now that I have an adaptation?
You've got to apply it throughout.
I need to apply it to the SIP entity, or otherwise I did nothing, right? So I need to go to the SIP entity. What SIP entity?
Lab 10 to seal.
The only one that I have in my scenario, which is CM, right? So if I go to CM, I'm going to apply this adaptation here, change domain, commit, and I'm gonna let's go to the trace, and I'm gonna place that call one more time. Still failing. It could be that session MI is not yet synchronized with the change, right? Could be it, or could be something else, I don't know, we'll see. It was just a matter of time. Blah, blah, blah.
I didn't catch the name of the other domain that they built, that Shri something that was in there. So this adaptation would, it doesn't require that the source was ABC. You're taking any domain that was able to register to the session manager and changing it to Converge1 before going to that CO.
Yeah.
As opposed to a specific domain.
Changing the domain in the invite and in the PAI, no matter what the domain is, I'm changing it to be converge1.com.
Right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, I want to point out some stuff. Notice the invite that goes to CM now replaced. In the invite, you see that the request URI was replaced, right?
Mm-hmm.
The P asserted identity header, as you can see here, was replaced as well. But notice that the from header
Still had the original domain
and the to header.
also.
So session manager by default doesn't modify the from header or the to header
Oh, I see.
if you don't tell session manager to do it. Most of the applications don't care about those headers, instead care about this request URI for destination and P asserted identity for origination.
That's why I thought the destination was also abc.com. And in fact, it 1401 is
You
not.
see, so instead of caring about, I mean, most Avaya applications actually care about the PAI for caller ID, and for dialed number, they care about the request URI. Maybe you're trying to communicate with a third-party application. Even CM. Let me show you that you could change that in CM. Before I show you something else, let me go back to CM. We're going with training 1, right?
Yep.
In CM, if you get to see, let me see the signaling group 1. So in CM, if I do change trunk 1, notice that CM for this SIP trunk group is saying, you see, identity for calling party display is based on the P asserted identity. And not only CM, most of the Avaya applications are going to care about the P asserted identity for caller ID and request URI, for dial number. You could change this in CM, and if I go there, you'll see that the two options that you have is either P asserted identity or the from header. But I want to leave it as P asserted identity. Okay. However, maybe you're trying to communicate with a third-party application, and that third-party application checks the from header and the to header instead of the PAI and the request URI. So you could, if you want, you could go to your adaptations. Let's see, adaptations here. Change domain, and there is a way to change the from and the to header. Let's go back to the help, and you're gonna see that if I go with this option, from to, if I set it to true, then the adaptation modifies the from and to headers of the message. So all I need to do is say, hey, I want to add an extra parameter here, from to equals true, which means that I want to modify the from header and the to header as well. So let's see. I'm gonna place that code one more time. Trace it. Ahead. And if I get to check the invite, the from header, where is the from header? Was modified as well, you see?
It says that's it. Yeah.
And the to header was modified as well. Now maybe the problem now that I may have is that, I may also want the AC23 phones to call my phone, right? And they're in the converge1.com domain, and I want them to be able to call me here. So maybe it's time for me to create an incoming adaptation, Jesse, so that calls from CM going to Session Manager are modified as well. So if I want to do that, I would go back to the adaptation, change domain, and this time I would add 2 extra parameters. In this case, for incoming, for an incoming adaptation. If I go back to the help, you'll see that for ingress or incoming, the parameters are these: ingress override destination domain, that can be abbreviated as IODSTD. So IODSTD would be equal to abc.com, right? Because I'm going now in the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And also to modify the P asserted identity, I would need this one, override source domain, that can be abbreviated as OSRCD.
And the one below it,
Let me see.
Yeah, wasn't it
Under ingress.
iOS RCD?
under English.
Oh, good catch. Yeah, has to start with I. Yep, good catch. Right, this one here, it's gonna be set to abc.com as well. Right, And now I would have an adaptation, an incoming adaptation for calls coming from CN to session manager, and outgoing adaptations for calls going from session manager to CN. Now, this is probably gonna work, right? And the HTTP phone is gonna be able to call me. The problem with this approach that I just followed, there's a problem, right?
Mhm.
What's the problem with the approach?
No longer could he call me.
Yeah,
'Cause
I'm another office of Converge One.
I see. Yeah, and I saw your face, and you were like, something's going on, right? You see it, right? Because at this point, go ahead and try to call me. 1203. Perfect.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Now call your other SIP phone, not me, but the SIP phone that you have right now. No, that might work. Depends. Okay. No,
No, it
it's
didn't.
blocked, right? Because your phone is in the abc.com.
Right, and he's in Converge, so.
Sorry, your SIP phone is in converge1.com,
Right.
but I'm converting everything that comes from CN.
Right.
So the invite now is going to abc.com, and there's no one like that in session.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe not the best approach, right? Maybe not the best approach. So another way we could fix this. Now, before I fix it, also let me point out that now that you see that you could do a bunch of stuff within this adaptation, not only domain name conversion, but I could also create digit conversions for incoming calls to session manager and digit conversion for outgoing calls from session manager. Could have a bunch of stuff there. So a better name for this adaptation would be maybe something like adaptations for CN. Because it could be a bunch of adaptations, a bunch of conversions, so that would be a better name, Okay, so let me remove 2 entries here because we realized that creating the incoming adaptation, was not the best idea. So let's remove those 2 entries. And save. And what I could do, a more elegant approach to fix this problem would be to go to user management and go to my user profile and create a new communication address for my user. Remember, I could have multiple communication addresses. Another for 1203, but this time at converge1.com. So I'm active in this one here, but since I have the other one assigned to me, session manager is going to see in which one I'm active, and it's going to proxy the request to that one. And let's see, go ahead and place the call from the H23 phone, and my phone should ring.
Oh, 1401.
1203.
1203.
Yeah, that works.
Okay. And now you should be able to also call the other SIP phones because we're not converting whatever comes from CN,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right? Because now I just use the fact that I could have multiple communication addresses with different domains, right? And session manager reaches me in the one that I'm active. So, cool. Nice.
It's good for when you're acquiring a company that's got its own domain and you're going to ease them into changing them to your domain, but you want to make them active day one. Do an
Yeah.
export on all your
You
stations.
just give them, you
And
use
add- and
everybody
add-
to communication
and
addresses.
everybody gives that new domain as well as their own domain so that they can better communicate with those folks that come out.
Correct. Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to show you this because there's a good chance that next week you go back to your production environment and you go to adaptations, and you get to see this kind of stuff like that, like ODSTD, OSRCD, and you're like, what's this? I have no idea. Why are you doing this? Now, this also opens the door for an interesting conversation. Now that you know that you could use domain name adaptations or modifications, it opens the door for conversation. Where's my mark? For something that maybe you haven't thought about. So you have your CM here. Stay here with me because this is important. You have your CM, right? You have your session manager. And let's go to the first drawing I had, the very first day, where you also had an SBC, right? With trunks. And remember that we had some applications, like an IVR, voicemail. In general, we said maybe a third-party application. They don't have to be Avaya applications. Okay. So, remember you have here digital, analog, H223. So you're gonna see later, or at some point, you're gonna realize that this is not only one SIP trunk. This is gonna be more than one SIP trunk, right? And here in the lab we only have one. But in real life, a good practice is to have one SIP trunk here for each different purpose. Also remember that you have here a SIP phone, right? Grabbing features from CM. So it would be nice, if for the SIP phones to grab features from CM, you could have one specific SIP trunk. Optim. That's how people call it, Optim trunk. Or let's use for facility, just call it AST traffic.
A single trunk or trunk group?
A single trunk group. It could be more than one trunk group, but let's just for simplicity say one trunk group with up to 255 trunks, but as a single trunk group dedicated just to AST traffic or Optim traffic. Then maybe for these users in CM to dial out, you want to use a different SIP trunk, right? Say that this one here is for these guys to dial out from CM and go to Session Manager. Maybe you want to have the calls coming from the IVR, will use a different SIP trunk. Calls coming from the voicemail will use a different SIP trunk as well. You could use one SIP trunk for everything, but then you're not going to be able to measure traffic correctly, right?
But one trunk group is more efficient than 4 trunk groups.
Why?
Because you will make the most of your trunk group bandwidth, or is there no limit? Why, normally you would never dedicate a trunk group for something that, unless you had to be sure that you had a trunk available for some reason.
Yeah, are SIP trunks licensed expense? In that environment, if they were 255 each, you've got just over $1,000.
You do license ports in Session Manager, but it doesn't matter. You could have one trunk with 255 license ports, or 4 trunks with the same amount of ports licensed.
But what Wayne's saying, that's just over 1,000 trunks if those were all 255s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just over 1,000 trunks, so that's 1,000 licenses. If you could, and you might have as many as 255 calls to any of those 4 purposes. Well, you're dedicating them in that environment, so you have to have the 1,000. And what we're commonly used to is being able to reduce things like trunk licenses to have fewer trunks and let them play many different roles.
No, because you have the traffic that you have.
Yeah, but you could do all of that over, if you're never gonna have more than 255, you've only got 255 agents or possibilities. So you're never gonna have more than 255 calls at a time, but they could be a few here, a few there, a few the other place. So you, in this drawing, we'd have to have 1,000 trunk licenses.
No. Remember, you're the one who decide how many trunks you want within the trunk group. I'm
So
saying that
there's
the
no
maximum.
cost for those?
I mean, there is a cost in Session Manager, yes, but it's the same cost that you would have if you just decided to do it in one trunk group. I mean, this is just for you to be organized, you know? I mean, if you do it in one trunk group with as many, let's forget about the 255 limit of the trunk group. You know, you could do it in one trunk group or in multiple trunk groups if you know, and if you divide your traffic in multiple trunk groups. I mean, at the end, it's gonna be the same amount of trunks. So it's gonna be the same amount of licenses from the session manager perspective because it's the same amount of traffic.
No, anytime that you combine trunks, you always are more efficient in the use. Anytime, if they're all going to and from the same place,
Because the trunks can be used dynamically for
if the
different.
trunks are used
That's
dynamically for whatever
well
purpose,
said.
you don't have to dedicate a purpose, you always use less trunks. So
I mean,
you're saying,
if we did all this with one trunk, maybe we could get away, if we considered that each of those were 255, if we were able to do it over 2 trunks, then we could maybe get away with 510 channels, and it would still support our maximum ever active.
I'm not getting it, to be honest with you. Let's say
Yeah.
let's say that you know that your IVR traffic is 2 calls. That's it. You know that. Maximum
Right.
of 2 calls. And then this one is a maximum of 2 calls. And then let's say the phones also would use a maximum of 2. So what else I have here? And this one here is also a maximum of 2. So you could create one trunk group, right, with 2, 4, 6, 8 trunks, right? Or 4 trunk groups, each one with 2 trunks.
What we're saying is that the one trunk could very probably be smaller. It could get away with 6.
yeah.
Because there's no chance that you're going to have 2 calls in IVR, 2 calls in VM, and 2 calls from the AST SIPs over there at the same time.
That's the way the whole
So
industry
you're
works.
in a
correct?
non-blocking environment, in a non-blocking concept.
Yeah.
You're correct, but in reality,
Right.
customers will say, "Wait a minute, why couldn't I get away with 700 or 6 in these numbers? Why can't I just buy 6 licenses for SM?"
Well, then you consolidate, yeah. So you just,
What's the drawback? Because you're saying.
I mean, you consolidate and you
I
say, okay,
agree
it's
with
one,
this
one,
organizational
one.
structure being a bonus, a benefit.
But if it costs money, it doesn't happen.
I mean, the benefit is just to organize, to have traffic for different purposes through each trunk group. That's it. So that you can measure, if you measure this trunk group, the one in red right now, you know that's for outbound traffic. You know, you're measuring only outbound traffic coming from these endpoints.
But you know that for 50, 60 years, we don't dedicate trunks for this department over here and that department over there, so I can tell.
Yeah, but you're probably talking or thinking about digital trunks, where you cannot
There's
buy
a
the entire
cost.
package.
There's a cost, it's the
Yeah,
same difference.
I wonder how pricing works for session manager trunk.
If it's $10 for 10,000, then whatever, right? But if it's $10 a license,
Yeah, or if it's maybe active calls.
right?
Then you could throw 1,000,000 trunks at it, but you only have right to use 6 at a time.
Right.
Then it's fine. Then
Yeah,
this is
with
great.
every release,
Yeah.
things change in that license, but pretty much this amount of ports being used. One registration of a SIP phone uses 1 port, 1 trunk. connected.
One active trunk or one registered trunk, or one translated trunk.
1 port pretty much being used in Session Manager, meaning that if the SIP phone registers, it's going to use 1 port. If the trunk has 1 call going to that trunk, going to Session Manager, that's going to be another port. So that's pretty much how Session Manager is licensed. And depending on the version, also the license takes into account the amount of Session Manager instances. So you have 1, 2, 20.
I'll talk to Roger a little about, he's a gentleman here that does design.
Right.
I'll talk to him about what, because he's,
Because they would never, if there's any cost involved, do it that way.
right.
Yeah, I still
But I see
don't.
this a lot. Now, the magic that came to me here is voicemail, because we very often see in many instances, the first implementation for our customers of Session Manager was for their first item was Aura messaging, SIP integrated Aura messaging. And it has confused me as to why there would be multiple trunks from the CM to the Session Manager when, you know, why tie multiple things from this box to that box? Why don't we all ride the same pipe? Because I'm like old school Wayne idea of you put everything in the one pipe and then you break it back out and you share that pipe for all purposes. So if
Yeah.
at the moment you've got high IVR in the morning but high VM in the afternoon, it's a shared single pipe.
Yeah, but I think that way of thinking comes from the fact that back in the day, for a T1, you need a card. You know, you need to buy a card or a media module, right? And if you end up needing 25 channels, then you need to buy an extra card.
Right.
But here it's not like that. I mean, it's just a matter of, licenses in Session Manager.
Also, it does depend on how much license and how licensing and Session Manager is done and what the cost is. It must not be very high.
It must not, because I see so many tagged SIP trunks that are 255. It's like,
Yeah.
well, what the hell, we're doing it, why not, let's stick
It almost
255
has
on
to
it.
be active.
It's gotta be an active billing.
Yeah, there's no way it could just max it on its high.
So what I wanted to show you is that there are different approaches to configuring this. Because think about this, for you to decide the trunk that you want to use, from the CM perspective is easy, because you already know that you use an AR table that points to the route pattern, and the route pattern points to the trunk. So selecting the trunk that you want to use for outbound traffic, in CM, is easy. The thing is, okay, what about for inbound traffic, for traffic coming from Session Manager to CM? How do I select the entity link? Remember that from the Session Manager perspective, this is an entity link. How do I select the entity link that I want to use? Remember that the entity link, it's going to be associated to a signaling group in CM, right? To a SIP trunk in CM. So the question is, from Session Manager, how do I select that trunk? Because notice that you never, if in routing, you never specify the trunk that's going to be used or the entity link that's going to be used. You simply say, when you configure routing, hey, for Session Manager, or when Session Manager receives a specific dial number, send it to CM. That's it, but you never say how, or by using what specific trunk. So there are two approaches to accomplish this. One approach is known as a port-based routing. So what you could do is, you could say, okay, this trunk, the one for voicemail traffic, is going to be TLS, port, let's say 5061, right? And then for traffic coming from the IVR, it's going to be TLS as well, but for 5062. And for outbound traffic, it's going to be TLS 5063, and so forth. You get the idea. For AST traffic, which is features going to the SIP phones, TLS 5064. This is known as port-based routing, and a lot of customers have this configured, so that the SIP the SIP trunk that is selected, or let me rephrase this, the SIP trunk is selected based on that port. Now, this works fine. The only thing that sometimes I don't like about this approach, here in the whiteboard looks fine. The only thing that sometimes I don't like about this approach is the fact that you end up having to configure in your system manager CM as multiple SIP entities. You end up having to configure CM as a SIP entity for the IVR, as a SIP entity for the SIP phones. In this example, you would have to define 4 times CM as a SIP entity with the same IP address,
Mhm.
which could be a little bit confusing. You know, when you go to see your CM define it 4 times, same IP address, and the people would probably name it like CM for IVR, CM for voicemail, CM for AST traffic, CM for, I don't know, something else. It's fine, it works, but I find a little bit confusing. And also, if you trace, since that CM, all of those SIP entities have the same IP address, sometimes the tracing tool gets confused because it doesn't know, I mean, you might be trying to see a problem related to, I don't know, voicemail, and the trace is going to show you CM for the IVR because it has the same IP address. So it's okay, I mean, if you know what you're doing, you know it's the same CM, but you know, like, to me, the configuration looks a little bit awkward. You know, it's not bad. It's not that it's bad configuration. It's just that that's the way you would make it work. You would also need to create 4 SIP entities, right, and 4 routing policies to go to the same CM. Now, there is another approach, which is known as the domain-based routing approach, where instead of changing the ports, you manipulate domains. So what you end up doing in this other approach is you say, okay, all of the traffic coming, let's say from the IVR, you're gonna name that IVR, the domain coming for the domain associated to the traffic coming from the IVR, you're gonna change that domain to be IVR local, let's say. .local. You just come up with this fake domain that you want to assign to calls coming from the IVR in this case. If it's coming from the voicemail, you're going to maybe work with VM.local. If it's coming from the third-party application, something else. If it's coming from the SIP phones, let's say, you would use maybe the real domain. I don't know, SIP.local, let's say. And then your signaling groups and your entity links all have the same port, so you're not changing the port. TLS 5061 for everybody, right? TLS 5061 for everybody. But then you just make sure, well, this IVR.local or VM.local domain could be changed here in the IVR, but maybe, I mean, there's a good chance that you cannot modify that domain in the IVR. So what you do is you modify it here in Session Manager with an adaptation, the way I just showed you. You modify it with either an incoming adaptation or outgoing adaptation, right? So you modify that domain, and then Session Manager is going to select the SIP trunk that has that domain in the signaling group.
But then CM's not going to talk to IVR.local because that CM's converge1.com. So we had to adapt in SM the IVR.local to be converge1.com
Yeah.
on its way out. But that's after it's already done its routing?
Yeah, you
Right.
do it, yeah, so you're right.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. Then for
Okay,
outbound
cool.
calls, you'll have to modify things too. So you'll end up here with some inbound adaptations and outbound adaptations for the same SIP entity, in this case CM. See? And it's just another approach. I mean, the one thing I like about this approach is that you end up only with one entity link between Session Manager and CM. It's a TLS port 5061, let's say, entity link, right? And your CM in System Manager is only defined as only a single SIP entity. Also, you only have, what, one routing policy that says whatever dial number is received, if it matches with the dial pattern associated to CM, send it there. But then it selects the SIP trunk based on that domain.
That domain.
Two different approaches, you know, the two of them work. And I wanted to mention it because you want to see, and you probably already saw this
Yeah,
kind of,
I've seen and not known what was behind it.
yeah. Okay,